support of justice, making sure that everyone is in line, and make sure everyone's having a good time.
And who's taking care of Gotham City while you guys are here in Ohio?
Right now, we were sharing time. Right now, Batgirl is taking care of it for us.
And Robin, is it true what I hear about you and Batgirl? You guys an item or what?
We got to keep that on the low.
There are those that will come in and they're not saying anything, but they're shaking their heads, and I know that they don't get it. They still think of comic books as funny books. I have people ask me, well, what kind of funny books you have, or what kind of funny books do you sell? And maybe it's just their terminology from when they were kids, but it sometimes comes out almost disrespectful.
I've got to say, I'm not a do-gooder. I'm not an altruist, and I'm not the kind of person who works for charities and things. I'm a very selfish man who draws and writes comic books for a living and gets a little nuts whenever anything's between me and my drawing board. Everybody adamantly and passionately believes in your right to agree with them. That's just the way it works. And so you get these opportunistic politicians, you get these misguided do-gooders, a variety of people, and they're looking for what can I get away with. Okay, censoring movies is really tough because the movie people have a lot of money. Censoring books, you're in real trouble because people actually believe in the First Amendment in the publishing industry. And librarians will come at you with pitchforks. Comic books. Small. People think they're for kids. The retailers live, they don't have a gigantic amount of cash to throw around. And in retailing, in almost any field, you're about 3 weeks from being out of business. So all you got to do, if you really want to shut something down and make a splash, go after a comic book store. I hate to be giving you enemy advice like this, but go after a comic book store, get a court order, shut it down, starve it. You can act all righteous. You can of course repeatedly use the word children. That word has to be used in every sentence by every politician everywhere in the country these days, because everything's about the children, or more accurately, our children.
Marvel Knights sort of walked through the door and said, you know what, I'm going to call up my pal Kevin Smith. I know he's a comic book fan. I know he's always wanted to write. Give him a shout. Gave Kevin a call. He was floored. Now, what's really funny about that is that Kevin has been, 2 years prior to that, Kevin was in every major comic book magazine saying, I love comics, I love comics, I love comics. Oh, by the way, I write hit movies. And nobody put the two and two together to ask him to write a comic book. Well, I think with respect to Marvel Knights and bringing in more and more creators into the fold, I think what Marvel Knights was really, really good at was, and I hate this phrase, but I can't think of anything better right now, which is thinking outside the box. And the phrase is really appropriate with Marvel, because if you look at Marvel as this house of ideas, or house that ran out of ideas, we kept going back to the well, to the same old creators, to the same old ideas and concepts. Okay, we need to do something big this year. Okay, great, let's do an X-Men crossover. Whoopee, we've done a million more. And the same thing with writers and artists. And no slight to those guys, but there was no movement here. There was, there was a time in the 70s and in the early 80s where Marvel had this incredible, open door of creators coming in and just doing amazing stuff. And I think that door closed when the Image guys sort of left. I think it left this place really kind of burned. And I never understood that attitude, though, of closing the door, because you're really not doing anything but cutting your nose off to spite your face.
And, I was actually sitting in the lobby of Diamond on the very big day with my little solicitation for my first issue on my lap. Right. The day that the other biggest remaining distributor was bought by Diamond. And I felt like I was, sitting in the lobby, the day Lincoln was shot. If you can show them that you will produce reliably, that you won't just make that one issue and then vanish, it cuts so much ice with them, it's not even funny. That really is the blown out candle on the birthday cake as far as they're concerned. Yeah. Produce.
I would sit down to work, and here was this thing that I could do that always made me happy, and I felt so robbed, so cheated. By some of the people that I ran into in this business. Try to steal from me something that belonged to me, the thing I loved to do. I really loved to draw, and they tried to make me feel dirty, and they tried to make me feel stupid, and they tried to make me feel like I had nothing to offer, even though they seemed to spend a hell of a lot of time trying to take something from somebody that supposedly had nothing to give.
Another weird one was one time I received a letter from a fella, and it was impeccably typed, perfectly grammatically correct, and the letter began out, Dear Matt Wagner, please, 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 I beg you, finish reading this letter. I swear I am not insane. And then he goes on to outline how he and a friend of his one night operating a Ouija board had contacted the spirit of Merlin, and he now had the vital information for me about the time, place, and date that the three of us, he and his friend and I, would reclaim the blade Excalibur when it rose from the earth again. In fact, one night he somehow got a hold of my home phone number and left a message on my answering machine about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And he was extremely earnest and extremely pleading. Please, please, you must call me. I have vital information for you.
How did that end?
Well, needless to say, I didn't call him back.
I want to see Matt Wagner. I've got a lot of tattoos on my back I want to show him.
Really? Can we see? Oh, wow. That is awesome. Look at that. Get a shot of that.
I want to show him.
Wow. And that's a permanent tattoo.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Yes, that's what tattoos are.
Now, you sure he's going to sign that?
Well, I've always loved the comics format. Number one, because of its simplicity. You know, all you need is a piece of white paper and a pen, and you can do comics like you can buy anywhere. You know, there's no setup like making a movie, or you don't have to buy lots of paint like if you want to do oil painting. And I actually love the art of comics. There's a certain confusion as to what the art of comics is, and the art of comics is not the art of illustration. The art of comics is telling stories in pictures, and it's the moving from one picture to another and piecing together a narrative. And the kind of the closure that pictures imply. You know, it is often said that the art of comics is in the space between the pictures, and I believe that's true. So that's what I've always loved. I've never been particularly enamoured of producing static images. I mean, comic images are static, but they're related to one another and give the illusion of life and the illusion of movement, and it's that trick that I've always found fascinating.
I'm almost through with the pencils now. Inking should take about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes for the brush work. I'm really not trained in graphic art. I've had to make this up as I go and learn as I go, and hope I, bear some semblance of professionalism. Lettering will take about 20 minutes tops. Cross-hatching could take well into the evening. It really depends on how the brushwork inking goes. I do all this cross-hatching partly for texture and partly because I don't know how to place blacks. People who can just splat blacks onto a page and have them look perfect, I am in awe of such people. I'm not one of them. I'm trying to learn how to do it. Until such time as I make a little more progress on it, what I do is throw down some flat blacks where I know they belong, and then spend the rest of my day noodling around with the texture until it looks like something.
I always begin by starting off with a rough sketch for my cover. From there, I begin the process of doing a photo reference. I set up the model and the lights, depending on what kind of mood I want to convey. Once I have the photograph, I can begin drawing the pencil sketch of my cover, and from there I send the illustration to whichever artist I'm working with at the time. The artist then sends me the cover painting. Once the logo and other graphics are applied to the finished piece, we're ready to go to press.
You have to work at something. I mean, you know, when you're 21 years old, you're looking at a lifetime of work up ahead of you, hopefully, whatever it is that you're going to do. So it just seemed to me that if I'm going to have to be working anyway, I might as well work at something that I really want to do and do it exactly the way I want to do it. And if that fails, then you know, I'll go out and find something more lucrative or whatever that maybe doesn't appeal to me quite as much.
Has everyone read Captain America 50? Does anyone care?
I don't care.
Do you care?
I have read
Do you
it.
care? You care down there, Captain America 50? Do you care? How can you kill Captain America in the nuts?
They did.
No, but it's gone back to
think
the
he's gonna
original
stick with it.
owner, and so you know now it's not going to be a Marvel book. And his final issue in Marvel is Nuff Said Marvel.
I've never heard anything about that. No kidding. Tell me about that.
I don't know. I didn't read it. It was crap.
I bought the trade. One for $6 in it, so.
Wizard Magazine. Or at least the publishers think they do. Either way, the result is the same for all the disgust you'll hear about Wizard and its shoddy practices when you talk about publishers and marketing, when you talk to publishers and marketing folks. And I've yet to hear a single good word from anybody about this thing that ought to come on a roll. If the paper weren't so damn insufferably slick. For all of that, the publishers kowtow. Even though this tree killer here regularly and continuously cheapens and poisons our field, aesthetically and ethically, they grovel. Even though this monthly vulgarity reinforces all the prejudice people hold about comics, declaring to all the world that we're as cheap and trashy and stupid as they think we are. We sponsor this assault. We sponsor it. We pay for the goddamn privilege. Thank you, sir. I'll have another. But really, when do we finally get around to flushing this thing? This load of crap. When are we going to flush it once and for all? And when are we going to finally realize what we've got?
He stands at attention. Brown sulfur clouds on the 4th of July, like his father before him. His place in a town that's known as forever. Street called Nowhere to Go.
Hi, thanks for coming by to check out my film. My name is Rich Henn. I do a book called Time Spell, and more currently, I do a strip called Zoomy that runs in the back of Carla Speed McNeil's Finder. Now it seems I'm a filmmaker of sorts. Back in March of 2001, I decided to do a documentary about the comic book industry. While the thesis of the film was to focus on self-publishing and the small press, the unsung heroes of our industry, I think, I really felt the need to try and encapsulate the industry as a whole. And to do that, I needed to have some sit-down interviews with some really big names in the industry. Names like Joe Quesada, Frank Miller, Dave Gibbons, the list goes on and on. And what I found was that in the course of filming this piece over the past 2 years, I had amassed over 45 hours of footage, a lot of which probably wasn't going to be seen by the general public. Several people who had seen pieces of the film had asked if there would be DVD extras, if there would be an opportunity for them to see a lot of these interviews uncut and unedited. The short answer was no. I needed to put together a 2-hour film that would probably only have little bits and pieces of these interviews, but yet so much of these were so good in and of themselves. More currently, it became apparent to me that perhaps there could be several films culled from this footage, and perhaps the first of which is what you're about to see. What you're going to see coming up in the course of the next 2 hours are the interviews as they were given to me, uncut and unedited. You're going to see some really good stuff. It's uncut, it's unedited, it's mainstream raw.
Rise and shine from the dawn said, have you heard the king is dead? He's forgotten all he's learned. No one really seems concerned. He finds ways to hang his head.
Can you tell me, how long ago did you get into comics, and what was your earliest work?
Let's see, how long ago did I get into comics? What was my earliest work? I guess the earliest work would be I did some coloring work for a now-defunct company called Valiant. And Valiant just sort of, I just kind of walked in off the streets. It's a bit of a long story, but I showed them my illustration portfolio because I really, I wasn't a comic book guy when I went to art school. I went to the School of Visual Arts, which is actually here in Manhattan, just a few blocks away. But I went to Valiant with my illustration portfolio, and they hired me right there on the spot, and that was Jim Shooter's brand new fledgling company. And what had happened at that time was that they were a bit over budget and a bit overstaffed. So I got to work there for about 4 months and got some really cool experience in the ways of making comics. After those 4 months, the bankers came in and laid off like about 3/4 of the staff. Of course, you know, me being one of the new guys, I was pretty much gone. So, but luckily I'd saved up enough money and made enough contacts that I had about enough money probably to pay my rent for the next 2 months. So I took that time. I didn't find another job. I just said, you know what, I really want to be a comic book penciler. That was just my ultimate goal at that point. I'd seen guys doing it in the office, and I'm like, this is a great way to make a living. Just a lot of fun. So I took that month and a half, really focused on a portfolio, and then went back to Valiant to a friend I had made there, a guy named Arthur Nichols, who was an inker/penciler working for DC and Marvel, and at that point he was the art director at Valiant. So I showed him my portfolio, and he was floored by it. And he called a guy at DC, who was a brand new editor at DC, a gentleman by the name of Jim Owsley. So Jim had just like a slight opening in his schedule that day, so I ran down to DC, and I was so green, he wouldn't even let me in his office. He only met me in reception. And I showed him my portfolio. He loved the portfolio, but he was, again, a brand new editor at DC. So he only had 2 books that he was editing. Again, he just inherited the 2 books, and so there were no slots open. So he kind of felt sorry for me, and he asked me to do an inventory cover for one of these crappy TSR licensed books that he had. So being an eager beaver, I was there the next morning with the inventory cover, and he was kind of embarrassed by the fact I was there again. But here I was with this cover in hand, so he's like, that's great. He's like, I got nothing else for you. And I guess I must have had like some really sad puppy dog eyes going that day, because he just looked at me and he's like, you got any work? And I'm like, nah. He's like, you gonna pay your rent? I'm like, next week I think I'm done. So he told me to hold on, and he went in to talk to somebody, a guy named Bob Greenberg at the time, who was in charge of trafficking. at DC, and he went to ask Bob because Bob would know if there were any openings anywhere. And so I sat in the lobby for about another hour, and the receptionist called me, and she's like, "Mr. Owsley would like to see you now." And I'm like, "This is either good news or bad news." So I went to Owsley's office, and as I walked in there, he just said, "You are the luckiest guy on the face of the earth." And I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "What are the odds that I only have 2 books, and while you're waiting in the lobby, one of my pencilers quits?" He's like, "This is really unorthodox. I should be calling a pro, but do you want the gig?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So from that point on, I never stopped working. The kicker to those stories is that eventually I returned the favor for Jim Owsley, who became Christopher Priest and is now the writer on Black Panther. So we got that book kicked off with him, and Bob Greenberger now works for me at Marvel. I stole him over from DC. But anyway, as I continued working as a penciler at that point, I started getting some more and more lucrative gigs as time went on, and eventually it led up to what was a natural step, which was at that point me and my business partner decided that we were going to start our own company. So we started a company called Event Comics, and Event Comics led to some pretty cool stuff. I mean, we had some very cool creator-owned stuff. Character named Painkiller Jane, Kid Death and Fluffy, 22 Brides, and then primarily it was a character we created called Ash. And Ash was probably, to my recollection, the first superhero firefighter. And Ash, again, also led into other big things for us because Steven Spielberg and his new company DreamWorks eventually purchased the option to Ash for hopefully someday a major motion picture coming to a theater near you. And then the things just kept sort of snowballing from that point. And then one day we received this very odd call from the then president of Marvel Comics, a gentleman by the name of Joe Calamari. And Calamari, I believe it was Gareb Shamus who had a lunch with. Gareb Shamus is the owner, founder, editor, or actually boss, whatever they call him, editor-in-chief of Wizard Publications. So Gareb had a lunch with Joe Calamari, and Joe had asked Gareb if he knew any editors, artists, writers who maybe have a different perspective on Marvel Comics, or might have a decent perspective on what to do with Marvel Comics to try to liven up the industry a little bit. And Gareb had given him a list of names. On that list were me and Joey Palmiani, my business partner, and also I believe Brian Polito was on. There were a bunch of other guys on that list. So Joe called us a cold to have a lunch, and we had lunch with Joe, and he basically picked our brains, and he said, "What would you do with this? What would you do with that?" And we had a great lunch, and it was just really fun, sort of spitballing ideas, and nothing really came of it after that. And then a couple of weeks later, we got another call again from Joe, and at that point, Jimmy and I were sort of sitting there saying, are we wasting our time with this? Why are we just giving this guy ideas? So I think jokingly, I said to Jimmy, "You know what? If he asks us if we want to do anything for Marvel, I'm just going to tell him, let us be editor-in-chief. We're going to run the whole place. We'll take care of the whole place for him." To which Jimmy laughed a little bit, and then we went to the lunch. And there where Joe was asking us questions again. What would we do? What would we do? And then finally he just said, the inevitable question, would you guys want to do anything for us? To which I said, yeah, let us both be editor-in-chief. To which he laughed and then said, well, what if we give you 4 titles? And I'm like, 4 is good enough. And we started an imprint within Marvel called Marvel Knights. And Marvel Knights, after its first 2 years, the basic goal of Marvel Knights was to take characters, unknown characters that were either on the verge of cancellation or just non-existent. Daredevil, Black Panther, Punisher. These are characters that at one point were really fantastic and sold well, and now we're just gone. So we took those characters and we brought them into top 10 status, top 20 status, and then somewhere in that 2.5 years. Marvel got a new president of publishing at that point, a man by the name of Bill Jemas, and eventually Bill Jemas asked me if I wanted to be editor-in-chief, which was pretty ironic after a while. So that's it in a Reader's Digest version, although it may not seem that way.
Joe, with the success of the Marvel Knights imprints, really seeming to turn things around for Marvel Comics right now, it seems like there are more and more independent creators being brought into the fold. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I think with respect to Marvel Knights and bringing in more and more creators into the fold, I think what Marvel Knights was really, really good at was, and I hate this phrase, but I can't think of anything better right now, which is thinking outside the box. And the phrase is really appropriate with Marvel, because if you look at Marvel as this house of ideas, or house that ran out of ideas, we kept going back to the well, to the same old creators, to the same old ideas and concepts. Okay, we need to do something big this year. Okay, great, let's do an X-Men crossover. Whoopee, we've done a million more. And the same thing with writers and artists. And no slight to those guys, but there was no movement here. There was, there was a time in the 70s and in the early 80s where Marvel had this incredible, open door of like creators coming in and just doing amazing stuff. And I think that door closed when the Image guys sort of left. I think it left this place really kind of burned. And I never understood that attitude though of closing the door, because you're really not doing anything but cutting your nose off to spite your face. So when we came into Marvel Knights, I mean, one of the benefits of being a freelancer and being part of not only the creative community but also the independent publishing community with Event Comics is the fact that I know a lot of people in this industry. I know a lot of different artists, a lot of different writers, and I know the stuff that they're capable of doing. I think guys like David Mack, guys like Brian Bendis, I think they really proved that here are guys who never worked for the big two, Marvel or our distinguished competition, but yet at the same time, they've been doing work of, I'm not even going to say equal caliber, much superior caliber to the stuff that Marvel and DC have been putting out for years. But yet nobody has decided to either, I'm not going to say nobody decided to call them, but maybe they just, either nobody decided to call them or they just didn't make them an offer that was worthwhile. But I've known David Mack for years. And actually it's by virtue of knowing David Mack, and it's by virtue of our conversation when we started talking about doing Daredevil, where I talked to David about following up Kevin on Daredevil, that David sent me this package of this guy named Brian Bendis. And I read this Bendis guy's stuff, and I was like, absolutely floored. Next day I was on the phone with Bendis. So, we were speaking with Brian a year prior to his coming to work at Marvel, although we knew that he would come here, just because, these guys have their roots in Marvel Comics, just like a lot of us do. So, that was the key thing to Marvel Knights. And I think if there's any influence that Marvel Knights had on Marvel overall, it was opening the doors up to a lot of these guys. I mean, you see a guy like Paul Jenkins who comes in to write a book like Inhumans, and Jay Lee who swore off Marvel years ago, and we give him a sort of a comfortable place to and a playground to play in, and these guys excel, and they excel happily. And then the next thing you know is like Paul Jenkins is writing Spider-Man, and that to me was really cool. That really sort of makes me like get that whole proud papa kind of syndrome going on, because we did something that just hadn't been done here for a long time, and again, the thing I keep saying to people is, it wasn't hard to do. It really wasn't. It just took a couple of phone calls.
And it's a dead phone.
I think I'm just going to freeze in the camera.
That's a good one. In fact, if you really like, you can go like this and you can see.
Don't do that to me. Jeez, look worse than I thought, man.
Great.
Oh, he says that to all the girls. Come on.
So, where'd you get the grim and gritty look from?
Have we started?
Question one. You got
Are we set?
I won't answer that question in English or in Mexican.
You just received.
He got it.
Time delay.
Okay.
What about the state of freedom of speech, censorship, etc. in this country concerns you so much?
Well, it's I mean, the fight over the First Amendment's gone back since before the country even officially became a country, before there was even a First Amendment. Pat Buchanan memorably said in one of his bizarre speeches that there's a religious war going on in this country. He is indeed right, and he's squarely on the wrong side of it. Thomas Jefferson rightly defined the situation by saying that as long as religion and the state were kept separate, both could be in some way pure. But as soon as they intermingled, both were corrupted by the process. But those were just the opening blows of a battle that will go on for as long as we're around and beyond. And continuously we have this fight, and right now we have people who believe that ours is a Christian nation. Or, you know, some people think it's an Islamic nation. I mean, but the enemy of free thought and of good work is censorship. And anybody who has a job like mine is stupid if they're not rather adamant on the subject of free expression. I've had, I've got to say, I'm not a do-gooder. I'm not an altruist, and I'm not the kind of person who works for charities and things. I'm a very selfish man who draws and writes comic books for a living and gets a little nuts whenever anything's between me and my drawing board. What brings me to work for the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund is that I, like other people, want to defend this and know that we can only do it as a community. And so fundraising is required, and speeches have to be given. But it's an ongoing. The assaults are constant, and the assaults are always, almost always, either petty, malicious, or criminal. These people are bullies. Have your ambitious assistant district attorney looking to get reelected or looking to get elected, looking for a case. And censorship always sells to a fair amount of the people out there, left and right. I mean, Andrea Dworkin is as much of a censor as Pat Robertson is. Everybody adamantly and passionately believes in your right to agree with them. That's just the way it works. And so you get these opportunistic politicians, you get these misguided do-gooders, a variety of people, and they're looking for what can I get away with. Okay, censoring movies is really tough because the movie people have a lot of money. Censoring books, you're in real trouble because people actually believe in the First Amendment in the publishing industry. And librarians will come at you with pitchforks. Comic books. Small. People think they're for kids. The retailers live, they don't have a gigantic amount of cash to throw around. And in retailing, in almost any field, you're about 3 weeks from being out of business. So all you got to do, if you really want to shut something down and make a splash, go after a comic book store. I hate to be giving you enemy advice like this, but go after a comic book store, get a court order, shut it down, starve it. You can act all righteous. You can, of course, repeatedly use the word children. That word has to be used in every sentence by every politician everywhere in the country these days, because everything's about the children, or more accurately, our children. Their waived, the baby waivers are always doing that in order to shut down adult entertainment. And if they can, it's easier to shut down a comic shop than a porn shop. They have less resources, or they used to. Because now this organization exists ever since Dennis Kitchen created it. How long ago?
1986.
In 1986. Since then, it's grown and it's built and it has gone into the trenches and fought these battles one after another on the turf. And particularly the shop owners, but occasionally also the artists and publishers, now know that there's an ally there and a community behind them, where people only because they like to read comics will go and stuff cash into a bin and write checks and get memberships in this fund because they love comic books so much and they know that comic books can't exist with censorship. So
They agree with
see,
you.
they agree with me. Yeah, they're good religion there. I mean, ask why it's such an issue. That's the best I can say about it because first off, I'm selfish, but luckily there's an awful lot of people who are selfish for the same good reason.
Well, is it just selfishness why you're so adamant about creator rights as well? Or was there a little bit more to it than that? I'm thinking back to a rather famous speech, at least in the comic community, you gave about "Give Kirby back his art."
Oh yeah, that was a while back. That was just proper debt. Talking about Jack Kirby, other artists of his time, who built my entire field out of virtually nothing, and who by and large were treated so shoddily it's unspeakable. Many of whom, the ones I fought for were the lucky ones. Many of them died as alcoholics. They died poor. They desperately wanted to leave something for their families and couldn't leave a dime. And so I and a number of other people, and before me, in particular Neil Adams, started raising a stink. And just as it worked with the fund, the people who love comics also love the people who do them, and pressure mounted. But it was Neil Adams who also showed me my self-interest in that regard. He taught me and a number of other young artists. Damn you. But Neil Adams taught me and a number of other artists my age that if we were going to regard what we were doing as worthy material, if we were to say that this is an art form, it's a story form, this is not crap for little kids, then we had to demand the respect of the publishers and treat ourselves as authors and artists rather than as momentarily hired hands. When I first worked in comics in the late 1970s, there were no royalties, page rates were flat, and there was no possibility of any ownership in any manner of your own work. Since Neil Adams and since the efforts of some of us, this has changed to be a form where people could work and have dignity, and also have something for themselves and their families. It was a matter of self-respect.
1986 was a watershed year, not only for you with Dark Knight, but also a number of other works. There was the start of Mouse, Watchmen. Something's changed in the industry at that time. What are your thoughts on it now? And
the inmates took over the asylum. That was a giddy period because things had been building. Like I was saying here earlier on, the comic book publishers made an historic mistake all the way back in the 60s. They started putting the names of the people who wrote and drew the stories in the books. So I was able to grow up as a boy reading Legion of Superheroes. I actually never saw it, Legion of Superheroes, but I would read, say, a Spider-Man. And I would know that the Spider-Man that looked really good was drawn by Steve Ditko. And I knew that almost everything else that looked really great was drawn by Jack Kirby. And so I became not just a Marvel Comics fan, not just a Spider-Man fan, I became a Jack Kirby fan and a Steve Ditko fan. Well, their big mistake bore fruit, and the time came when people like me and others became popular enough where they actually had to start paying attention to us, and maybe even paying us. The thing that, it was in 1984 when DC Comics, threatened by a number of independent publishers who are already offering royalties and offering the authorship rights. And also were really hungry to get back what Marvel had so won from them in terms of the readership. Started approaching people like me and of all things actually proposed royalties. A mad scramble ensued. The Cuban Missile Crisis of comics history as Marvel Comics tried to figure out whether it was going to respond to that. Well, within weeks they did as they had to. They responded. Then, of course, everybody lied about it and said that they came up with the idea at the same time, but that wasn't what happened. I was there. I taped my note to the editor's office, saying that I was going to quit if Marvel didn't match it. All this happened. But the shakeup really came from the fact that the readers knew who we are, and they have affection for certain work, and they like the comics they like. They're not just it's not all franchises to them. They do love their characters, but they also know when their characters are in good hands and when they aren't.
It's like when the independents actually had a voice in the non-independent market.
Sorry?
It's like when the independents had a voice in the non-independent market.
Yeah.
It's like what you're saying is weird.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, this gets back to your question about 1986. And so what happened in one mainstream comics publisher was that once they had the royalties set up, then clearly the executives at DC Comics decided to roll the dice and say, let's give these guys a lot of rope. And rather than having a completely management-driven product, they would say, okay, you know, this guy Alan Moore writes incredible comics. He's got Dave Gibbons with him. He wants to do something based on the old Charlton heroes. Let's just let him do what the hell he wants. Frank's been popular on Daredevil. Everybody wants to see his Batman. Let's just say yeah. And they loosened the restrictions quite a bit. I mean, there's still some silliness that had to be dealt with, but generally they were, I think what they were, and I admire them for this, was to a certain extent throwing up their hands and saying, we can't do it from this end. Come on, bring it to us. And in the case of Dark Knight and Watchmen, that's what we did. Mouse is a completely separate event. Mouse is was a mainstream publishing effort that Art brought together. But with Dark Knight and Watchmen, it really was we were just running around turning tables over and doing the stuff that everybody wanted to be doing. And the readers showed up. Big time they showed up. And then the rest of the world showed up. And great success followed. And so, of course, the next step was, let's never let this happen again. and the management came back in, and instead of being the beginning of a rush in various wild and wonderful directions, Dark Knight and Watchmen became yet another template, replacing the old one. So it's like, oh, okay, they've all got problems. And you started having a drunk driver Green Lantern, and just all these depressed guys who could fly. That doesn't work for me. If I could fly, I swear I'd smile all day long. But that became the template, and they followed that, and it's run its course. And now the whole industry seems to be in a way holding its breath, trying to find out what the next big thing is going to be that's going to shock the system again. And I'm hoping it's going to be a ton of different things. I don't want a single big major event so much as I want to see things go in every direction at once.
So
and I think they will.
diversity is the future.
Yeah, I don't like the word diversity because it sounds too much like, it's like the old line about diversity is it's a bunch of people who look different but all think the same. I like cacophony or chaos. I'd like to see things splinter in a million directions. And look, they've already started. We've gone from a single subgenre, a completely dominated field, to having everything from completely genreless material to classic genre like crime comics and romance comics and beautiful fantasy works like Bone, Charles Vess's work. They're all happening, and it's just a matter of people retooling and rethinking what a comic book is. Because I love superheroes, I'm working on them right now, but they're only part of a great mosaic.
Thank you.
So worked okay?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
Touching upon the three things that I wanted to talk about.
What about comics made you decide to do it for a living? You're a good enough artist that you could do just about anything, fine art, etc., illustration. What about the comics format really drew you in?
Well, I've always loved the comics format. Number one, because of its simplicity. All you need is a piece of white paper and a pen, and you can do comics like you can buy anywhere. There's no setup like making a movie, or you don't have to buy lots of paint like if you want to do oil painting. And I actually love the art of comics. There's a certain confusion as to what the art of comics is, and the art of comics is not the art of illustration. The art of comics is telling stories in pictures, and it's the moving from one picture to another and piecing together a narrative, and the kind of the closure that pictures imply. You know, it is often said that the art of comics is in the space between the pictures, and I believe that's true. So that's what I've always loved. I've never been particularly enamoured of producing static images. I mean, comic images are static, but they're related to one another and give the illusion of life and the illusion of movement, and it's that trick that I've always found fascinating.
When you were working on The Watchmen, and you knew a question like this was coming, was it, at the time, did it occur to you that it would become this iconic kind of work and it has The Watchmen? Or was it just another job for you and something that you really enjoyed doing?
Well, when Alan and I started working on Watchmen, what we really set out to do was the kind of superhero comic that we'd always wanted to read. And Alan's first synopsis for it, which was based on the Charlton characters, you know, a group of characters that DC had bought, was really a kind of a straightforwardly reading superhero thing where there was somebody was plotting to kill superheroes and the other superheroes got together to discover why. But I think the thing about Watchmen is, and it relates to what I said about the fascination of the medium of comics, the thing about Watchmen is that it was the telling of it that we got captivated with. You know, how can we arrange these frames to get a specific effect? And we really went through everything we'd ever learnt about comics, or the stuff that Harvey Kurtzman used to do in Mad Magazine, the Eisner-esque things, you know, all sorts of influences, a European feel to it to make it look more documentary rather than a traditional American comic book. And so it really was the telling of it that we got interested in, but we never at any point, well, we eventually of course realised that we were like holding a tiger by the tail, but certainly the first couple of issues we did, we just felt like we were doing the best superhero comic we could. But then people started to see those and we thought, wow, we're really onto something. But while we were actually doing it, it was such a lot of work, and it really was 2 years of continuous, consistent work, really working our arses off, that it wasn't until afterwards that we could kind of consider it. And I suppose now, I mean, I'm a modest man and I'm not a kind of a prideful man, but looking back on it now, I know we did something good. More importantly than that, having been a lifelong comics fan, it's wonderful to have done something which has become like a milestone in the industry. To think that it's a thing that people refer to whenever you read a history of comics, they always mention it. And just as a fan, I'm really proud to have done that. I had no idea that that's what I was doing when I started drawing it, but that's just the way it turned out. Is that okay? Was that an answer?
No, because that's a whole 2-hour interview in itself, just talking about how it evolved the way it did.
Okay.
The beauty about the Watchmen is so transcendent. The way so many people look at it. I was telling Bill that a psych class in University of Buffalo was designed.
No, it's okay.
Was designed around the Watchmen.
Right.
That was Psych 101 around Watchmen, and their text was the paperback.
Really? Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, and
carry on.
Yeah.
There's been really interesting things like that going on.
Yeah.
Now, there's something that's kind of the upside of it, but there's also been, it's been spoken about a few times, almost a downside to it. And it has to do also with it coinciding more or less with the Dark Knight. And that's the whole trend towards dark and gritty. How much weight do you and Alan, and Frank up to a point of course too, have to bear for that suddenly descending, I can see the smile, upon the comic industry the way it did? Was that ever your intention to create this new movement? Or
when we did Watchmen, and when Frank did Dark Knight, we didn't have it in our minds for a minute that, okay, this comic industry is too cheerful, let's really make it dirty and down, let's gritty it up. We never even thought in those terms. Like I say, our impulse was to explore superheroes and maybe explore some aspects that hadn't been explored before. And when you think about what makes people put a costume on, you know, there are all sorts of motivations, and Rorschach was one extreme of that, you know, he was psychotic and he just had this obsession. And that to me is as valid as, you know, my parents were shot by a criminal, therefore I will put on a bat costume and terrorise the night. You know, we were only looking around things, but I think it was actually the people who came after Watchmen who seized on certain elements and thought, here's how we can make our regular superhero comics approximate to what Watchmen did. In other words, if we add a bit of grime to it, then we've got Watchmen. But of course they didn't. Alan and I often spoke at the time that if we'd done a superhero comic after Watchmen, the character we would love to have done was Captain Marvel. And we would not have gritted him up, we would have not have dirtied him up, we'd have done him as the kind of hero he is, which is a magical, joyful, dreamlike superhero. You know, the superhero can be a multitude of things. One of those things is grim and gritty. One or two of our superheroes, one of them probably, was grim and gritty. and it was expanded by other people. So I feel no responsibility. This is just what other people took from it.
So it's like the difference between noir and realism in a sense. You guys were trying to inject a sense of realism, real psychology into these characters. And what everyone saw and said was this, gritting of the teeth, almost a noir,
I guess.
approach to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Considering where the comic industry was and where you were, and where the industry is today and where you are.
Yeah. I can hold these thoughts, yeah.
Right. What are your thoughts about the industry today and its future?
Well, when I first started in comics, comics was like a mass medium. It was mass entertainment. It was a thing that lots of kids read, and some people went on to read in later life. That is not what comics are anymore. Comics are now a niche hobby. They're a specialist thing like fishing or stamp collecting or railroads, people who collect railroad statistics. Really, that's what they are. And it's clear that the audience is aging as well. It's a fan audience. So we're therefore catering to a different audience. And to that extent, it's the choice between, do you do work that appeals to a big audience and take a chance, or do you do work that appeals to a certain audience and not take a chance? In other words, do you give them what they want, or do you do what you want to do and hope there's an audience out there? So to that degree, I think the things become much more inward looking, and of course the economics of it mean that there isn't so much money around. Things have got to really hit or they get cancelled. And so I don't think that the industry's finished by any means. I mean, I went to San Diego this year and I was really most excited by San Diego. I really got a good buzz from it. There was so much going on, there was so much great imagery, there was a buzz. It wasn't just the superhero stuff, there was kind of movie stuff and game stuff and a whole feeling of it being, a kind of a force in popular culture that I found really exciting. But certainly one of the things to me that I was again most proud of with Watchmen is we did reach out to people who didn't normally read comics. I gave copies to the guy who was painting my house and he loved it. He stayed up all night reading it, So you can get to this audience. And certainly one of the upcoming projects I've got, which is for DC, I'm not aiming it at the comic audience at all. I hope the comic audience will like it and enjoy it, but I'm doing it in a style and in a manner that I hope will take it outside that. Because I'd just like to get more people to enjoy comics, because comics are a wonderful medium. They're a direct medium, they're a simple medium, they're an accessible and democratic medium, and I'd love to see them continue. Ta-da!
So all the proceeds for this went to the
Matt, when you first started out doing Mage and Grendel, did you ever think that it would exceed past what is probably your wildest expectations?
I'm often asked if I ever pictured things going as far as they have, specifically the Grendel storyline, whether I pictured it being this long, sprawling epic. And certainly I never envisioned the absolute specifics of my career, but I always knew my career would be a continuing thing. I never wanted to make a strike and stop, or make a strike and retire. I wanted to be a functioning, continuing, evolving, working artist forever. I worry about artists that burst onto the scene and seem to be fully formed and realized from the get-go. Seems to be nowhere to go but down, or just to stop in that case. I hope my best work is yet to come, and I hope my best work is always yet to come.
Tell me, if you could, the differences between the darkness of Grendel versus the light of Mage.
Well, Grendel and Mage are basically the two halves of my own brain. I'm a Libra, so I'm very much drawn to dichotomies, twos, doubles, positive and negatives. Of existent characters, I'm drawn most to Batman and Superman. And I always think Mage and Grendel are my Batman and Superman, my god of light and my god of darkness. It's one of the reasons I feel these two elements are very important elements of society, existence, the universe as a whole. It's one of the reasons most organized religions have never appealed to me, because they don't tend to stress the fact that both of these forces exist in tandem with each other. Buddhism does to some extent, but certainly not Christianity. And so these are my ways of examining the aspects of life that I think are eternal, that are forever.
Mage has somewhat of a mythology behind it, correct?
Mage has a mythology behind it. Grendel has a mythology behind it too. I'm very drawn to mythologies. I think mythologies are the way that we express ourselves, express our examination of these unknowns. I'm a great devotee of the work of Joseph Campbell, who stresses that myth and science can exist concurrently with each other at all times, and in fact do exist concurrently with each other at all times. But yeah, Mage utilizes very familiar, existent mythological motifs. But there again, so does Grendel. Grendel's really based upon the oldest epic English poem. In keeping with its dark overtones, it tries to turn everything that you preconceive about narratives on its ear. The bad guy's the main character. Most everyone comes to horrible ends, although the violence in Grendel is never justified. The violence in Grendel always exacts its own terrible retribution in some manner upon an actor. Problem.
No problem.
Let me have a sip here.
Sure. Tell me, if you could, about those early days at Comico. Was Grendel one of the first creator-owned characters that you brought to Comico?
Well, Comico was a bunch of college guys getting together and trying to publish comic books. Yeah, Grendel was the first thing I developed for them. It was part of Comico's initial 4 published black and white comics, none of which lasted more than 2 issues, except for Grendel. And then Mage was developed when Comico decided that they needed to go to color publishing, and it was cheaper to gang print books, so they had signed up Chuck Dixon and his, at that time, wife Judith Hunt to do Evangeline, and they needed another book to develop. They didn't want to pay anybody a whole lot of money, which they'd have to pay to a pro. So they figured one of us should do it, and I was the one that had gotten the most positive response from the 4 books with Grendel, so I was the de facto winner of that lot. And so I basically abandoned Grendel at that point, and then only after I was well into Mage was I hearing all this response from fans about, hey, I want to know the end of the Grendel story. So I reworked it into what eventually became Devil by the Deed, and was originally serialized in 4-page segments in the back pages of Mage.
And the look behind Devil by the Deed had such a beautiful dynamic to it. Very Art Deco.
Very Art Deco. That was mainly, the look behind Devil by the Deed was very Art Deco, and that was mainly based around my design sensibilities at the time, but more importantly was the narrative structure, which was told more like an illustrated novel than a traditional comic book with panels and word balloons and such. And the reason for that was I only had 4 pages each issue, and I had to convey a decent amount of story in 4 pages. Very tough to do in the more traditional format. So I decided to do it, as I said, kind of like an illustrated novel.
And it's just ballooned to such an amazing following. I dare say even probably more so than Mage.
Oh, it's kind of hard to describe which of those is more popular. Certainly, they both have a core group that follow them nearly religiously. If Grendel's more popular, I would say it's only due to the more continual manner of its publication. Mage was a 15-issue series. It was another 12 issues before another 15-issue series came out. Grendel's been in pretty much continuous publication for the last 20 years. A lot more material for people to latch on to. But the people that are into Mage are, when I started doing Mage 2, I heard from so many retailers that they were getting guys back in the comic store that hadn't been there in 15 years.
I myself, and I think I probably told you this before, I have gotten people into comic books that have never read comic books before based on showing them Mage.
I hear a lot of that. I hear a lot of women getting turned on to comics by Mage.
Yeah, totally. Two girlfriends in college, never read a comic book before. I showed them Mage, they loved it, they ate it up. Another girl that I worked with at a part-time job, she never read a comic book before. I mean, to a lot of these people who've never read comic books, they think Archie, Superman, Batman. Here, check this out. You gotta read Mage. They love it.
And the nice thing about Mage is that, as you said, it's a nice leaping point for a nice springboard for people that aren't used to reading comics. And yet it's not so outside the purview of comics that it's utterly alien and strange. It deals with fantastic matter, but it so pares it down to a very familiar sense. The superhero wears a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. The magic weapon is a baseball bat. It makes it familiar. It makes it contemporary. It makes it something in the currency of your modern heart and soul.
When you started out, you were fairly unknown, correct?
Totally unknown.
Now, you've become, I would dare say, almost superstar status, rock star status. You're doing a book with Kevin Smith, Mage, Grendel, both hugely popular. Do you see a lot of the rabid fan phenomenon at conventions as they do like fans of rock stars, movie stars? Do you get a lot of that?
I get a lot of unlike rock stars and movie stars, my fans tend to be readers. And reading is, I think on some level, a far less visceral experience than music and movies. Music and movies dig down into your guts and grab a hold of you. Reading digs up into your brain and grabs a hold of you. It can also grab a hold of other parts of you, but it has to be filtered through your brain. It's very proactive. I remember seeing a lecture that Eisner gave one time where he was trying to delineate the differences between comics and film, which are compared so many times. And he pointed out that the difference is in the interactive nature of the participant. The reader has a moment, unlike a live music performance or a movie, wherein you can't really stop the musician. You can't really stop the movie if you're in a theater. The reader has a point in every point of reading where they must turn the page. They're proactively in control at that point. Therefore, it falls upon the author to so enwrap and engage them that they feel no conscious choice but to turn the page, and that's when you've really succeeded.
Weirdest convention experience.
Oh, Rich, I thought there was going to be 10 minutes.
Just one. Just pick one.
One of my weirdest fan experiences is a fellow that used to used to be obsessed with the character of Etzel from Mage, and had an extremely specific fetish about the character and about the situations he liked to envision her in. He used to commission up-and-coming amateur artists to do drawings of her and he, or her and Kevin Matchstick, the main character from Mage, always embracing, never more sexual than that, just embracing, sometimes kissing, and always underwater. And he used to send me hand-colored stacks of Xeroxes of drawings he had commissioned to this deep that he would then hand-color and send to me. Many years ago, and many years later from when that initially began, I actually got to meet him at a convention, and through the course of his talking to me, found out that he had a very traumatic and he seemed to have some sort of learning disability. A very traumatic experience involving water and involving a young black woman, saving him from drowning at a very young age. So obviously this had definite and specific fetishistic importance to him. But I wouldn't describe him as rabid in the way that you think of.
Well, that's great. Is there anything else you want to talk about? I don't want to take up any more of your time. You want to talk about the movie? You want to talk about the...
No, the movie's too... no, don't talk about the movie. And that's our cue.
Yeah. We've just been dimmed down.
They're closing us down.
They're shutting us down.
Cool. Thank you, Matt.
Sure. Really well. Thank you very much.
When I was the editor on Primer for like 1 or 2 issues, when I was the Kamiko office boy, we had a standard rejection notice and a standard acceptance notice. And one day I got at the office a bizarre letter with a rebuttal from Mike Gold, who was the editor of First Comics at that point. And this letter was on a Xerox of Kamiko stationery. And it was, it was psycho shit. It was like, you fucking assholes, die, you fucking motherfucking pigs, you Nazi bastards, die, you fucking shitheads. A page and a half of that. Psychotyping.
He was upset about something.
And then he forged my name to it. And he sent it to...
oh, wow.
Sent it to Mike Gold, sent it to Jim Shooter, sent it to Dick Giordano. Different ones to each one of them. It wasn't the same letter. Mike Gold thought it was really me and wrote me back a point-by-point rebuttal.
Wow. He actually thought that you would do something.
Really me, yeah. I called him and told him, hey, Mike, this is me, and he was completely embarrassed in my presence ever since. But it eventually culminated through a long series of stupid events. We finally found out who it was. But he was, he was one of these little dweebs that, are the complete fringe elements of all this shit, And he, we knew who he was. He was a local in the Philadelphia area.
Oh, so it wasn't even like an intern or something?
No. He was just a scuzzy little shithead, One of these guys didn't bathe very much, bad teeth. Always kind of had this... His eyes cast at middle level, never looked you in the eye, never looked down, but always just like this, And so we found out who he was. And then it eventually culminated years later, because DC had gotten many of them. Years later, eventually, Ed Koch got one. And the NYPD called DC looking for me.
Wow.
And they explained what was going on. And then they called me and said, okay, that's the end of this. We need to know who this guy is. I know you know who this guy is. Tell me give me his name and address, and we're going to stick Warner security on him, Warner Brothers security on him. It's the last I ever heard.
Wow. So, I guess they really did. Colleen Durant's got... Wow. So that's how you got introduced into comics. Mm-hmm. Now, how did you actually, your first professional comic work?
It was creation conventions, running comic conventions and meeting people like Carol Kalish and Jim Shooter, Steve Englehart, and getting to learn from them. And in particular, I think it really started when I met Archie Goodwin. I actually embarrassed him one day because after about 2 years of knowing him, I turned and went, "You're it." I was like, "What?" I said, "You're it." Tag. He's like, "What?" I said, if I can get like half, like a fraction as good as you are, what you do is so cool. And he's like, well, yeah, I actually can't say what he said next because it was very rude. He said, one day, yeah, you'll never be able to do this as good as me. And I was like, whoa, you know, but that was Archie. He was always pretty funny and wild. And his wife is thanking me right now for not saying what he said. And I just decided, gee, you know, this would be a nice thing to do because I love comics so much. And after my creation time, I got a call from Kimiko, who I knew those guys doing conventions in Philadelphia for all those years. And I was always treating them well because they were nice guys. And they went, you know, you're pretty smart about marketing and you know about comics and maybe we'd like to hire you. You know, and they actually, now I'm forgetting, Carol Kalish hired me at Marvel first, which only lasted a year. 6 months in the office and 6 months at home working freelance. And I was really mad at her because it didn't last longer. And now in retrospect, it was the best thing she ever did. She gave me a Marvel credit on my resume at age 28 or 27. But I didn't have to spend all those years working at Marvel. I just went from there to Kimiko, to Dark Horse, and other places. And so it was like her way of being nice to me and giving me some credibility and then, here, go play where you'll be happier. And, you know, not that there's anything wrong with Marvel, but I was going to be happier doing what I did for all those years than if I started working on Spider-Man or something at age 28.
So the natural progression was Marvel with Carol, to Kimiko, to Dark Horse,
right,
to Oni.
To Oni, right.
Tell me a little bit about now when you went to Kimiko, was that in its fledgling days when it was first
starting out? Starting. They'd only put out that first Macross book. And they were, gosh, I think the Elementals, they had 2 issues out.
Now back then, that was still considered independent, right?
Oh, yeah.
Kimiko was...
Yeah. They did the black and whites that everybody hated, and every retailer said, please go away, never do this again. And then they came out with color, and they did Mage, and the Macross book, and then Elementals, and it just started getting more and more successful. So I was watching those guys during the black and white days. I knew them. Back in the early days, before they published anything, they actually at conventions, used to do X-Ducks, so that Marvel wouldn't get mad at them. They would make you, like they draw you, as an X-Men character, but you were also a duck. We don't know why, but Marvel couldn't, I guess the duck bill kept Marvel from getting upset at them. So they would like, oh, I'll draw you as an X-Men, but you're a duck. And that's how they started, actually, doing conventions and just selling sketches. So yeah, so the Marvel gig led into the Kimiko gig. And then Kimiko took off. I mean, I got hired, and then they hired Diana Schutz, who basically took them from a company that wasn't real good on schedules to we were getting Robotechs out one every 2 weeks. It was a 6-week schedule for each regular book, but you had a new Robotech comic every 2 weeks, and we never lost a beat, and that went on for 3-4 years, which was good because then the retailers started to take it seriously because they didn't have a bunch of angry fans going, hey, where's my books?
But back then the numbers, and I'm guessing, the numbers are different then compared to how they are today. I mean, those numbers today...
We're kind of back where we were, really.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, the Kimiko numbers were not the Image numbers. We weren't selling 400,000 copies of a book. We were doing, I think number-wise, you were looking at the Elementals and maybe Macross doing 50 to 80 tops. And that was a gigantic success, and they were color.
For something that's not mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then they'd go back to press because they were so popular, so there were reprints, and so you wound up selling. But it wasn't. When Diane and I wound up at Dark Horse, you're talking Aliens versus Predator #1, which was a year and a half late. Mm-hmm. Actually kept making the number go up. So I think their original number was like 200 and wound up selling over 400. And then I think 2 years later I watched somebody at Dark Horse get angry because their book only sold 200,000 copies. It's like, people would be kissing your feet if you were selling 200,000 copies today. So it's a big difference.
From a small press standpoint, I mean, from guys like me that do if we do 1,000, we're excited, we're ecstatic.
Exactly.
To do 200,000, I'm buying a new house.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And like I said, they were upset. Oh, I only did 200,000. You should be having a party and inviting me. So yeah, it's all relative.
I got my first job when I was 15 years old at a science fiction convention. An advertising agency saw my work and liked it, and they gave me jobs doing cartoons like a bull dancing with a margarita for margarita night at a local restaurant, and I did some little cartoon strips and stuff for them. But I don't think I got my first comic book job until I was about 16 years old, and I thought that was really, really great. It actually took a couple of years for that to come to fruition. But after I'd gotten paid and signed an agreement and got into the project, it turned out to be sort of a mild S&M superheroine, big busted, getting your shirt torn off, attacked by Nazis fantasy. And after being so excited that I'd gotten this assignment and working and developing it and coming up with all the characters and blah blah, I realized that basically I'd been hired to do softcore porn books that I couldn't even buy if I wanted to. And that was very disappointing. So I backed out of that job. I gave the money back, and it was pretty distressing. But at the same time, I was being wooed by a couple of other companies. One was the Dawning Company Publishers, which was a graphic novel publisher, and the other one was another small press. Dawning wanted to hire me right away. They had me do a number of samples, and they were looking at the book that later became A Distant Soil. And they didn't realize how young I was when they first started looking at my work, and when they found out I was in high school, they were not quite as enthusiastic. They said, well, I think we'd better wait until she can drive or something. But the other company, who had actually been shown my work by Dawning, spent some time wooing me, having me do samples and so on and so forth, and they eventually hired me first. And that ended up being Warp Graphics, and they published A Distant Soil right out from under Dawning's nose, and that did not go well at all. And ironically, I ended up leaving Warp Graphics after a couple of years and going to Dawning, which I did right before Dawning folded up shop. So I was batting 1,000. I certainly ran into more than my fair share of creeps. I had some really bad experiences. My mother used to accompany me to all the conventions I attended, but she couldn't be with me every single minute. And in fact, a lot of people were saying, you've really got to go to shows without your mother. It's bad for your career. It makes you look like a kid. So I was always trying to ditch her and be more grown up and like, no, I don't need my mother here alone with you in this hotel room. Yeah, it'd be some 40-year-old guy saying, I want to look at your portfolio. And I'd go, sure. And, not funny. But I had a couple of ugly experiences where it was, the usual wrestling match kind of thing. And I learned to travel with my mother, and I still do. There is nothing wrong with safety and numbers, and I certainly don't have as many problems as I used to, but there are a lot of dirty old men in this business, and they're perfectly happy to take advantage of young kids, not just financially. So, unfortunately, it didn't entirely destroy my love of comics, but it almost did. I considered getting out of the business several times because it just was so ridiculous. I mean, I think the low point for me was, I'll never forget this. I think it was 1984. And that was pretty early in my career, so to have a low point that early on is pretty sad. I had just been approached by DC Comics where they were going to create a line of comics for women and girls, and they were actually talking with Jean Aul, who was the author of Clan of the Cave Bear, about having me do an adaptation of her novel, which at the time was huge. And they had flown me to a couple of conventions, put me up in beautiful hotels, limo service, great meals. Here I am going from one show to another. It was my first summer as a pro. I was a real pro, actually making decent money and going to conventions and signing autographs. And I didn't have any money. I mean, I was working for a publisher at the time, not DC Comics, by the way, who was just ripping me off blind. I never had any money. And I didn't really know just how bad the embezzling was, but it was pretty bad. And I was going to these shows with no money. And at the time, you couldn't go to a convention and sell your own books. They didn't let you do that. Creators were just there to sign autographs and sell art. And I'd been in the industry for such a short period of time, I really didn't have any art to sell. It'd take you a year or more to get your art back from the publisher. And I had gone to this show sponsored by DC Comics. They bought me the plane ticket, put me up in a hotel, blah, blah. And I lost my plane ticket home. And I had no credit cards, and I had no cash. I think I had about $30. And my parents were out of town, so when I tried to call them for help, I couldn't get in touch with them. So I went to one of the editors I was working with at the time, not an editor at DC Comics, by the way. And I was crying because I didn't know what I was going to do. And he says, well, I'll loan you the money. I'll help you out. I was like, oh, thank you, thank you. Well, we get to the airport, and he informs me at the airport that I was going to come to the men's room with him to pay him back for the plane ticket. He wanted me to perform an act on him in the men's room of the Atlanta airport. And I'm like, for 118 bucks? And on the one hand, I heard Divine only got 20 from Hugh Grant. On the other hand, I simply wasn't willing to do it. So I went to somebody else. I said, no, sir, I will not do this. I am too virtuous. And I went to somebody else, and I borrowed the money, and I was able to get home, and I paid the money back and everything. But I think being offered $118.50 to give somebody a gob in the men's room of the Atlanta airport was just about as low as it got for me. And I'll never forget it. I came home, and here I had been going from show to show, and people telling me, oh, your work is so wonderful, oh, we want to create this new line of books for you, and oh, you're going to be the next big thing, and oh, you're young, and you're pretty, and you're everything. And I had no money. I was sleeping on my parents' couch. I couldn't get anyone to pay me the money they owed me, and dirty old creeps were offering me money for sex. I mean, I thought, this is really awful. And I crawled into bed for about 2 weeks, and I just cried. I mean, I crawled into my parents' couch for 2 weeks and cried. I was still living at home at the time, and here were all these people telling me all these great things about me. I had a book that was selling over 20,000 copies an issue. It was a black and white book at the time. I was getting work already in the mainstream, and I had nothing. I had absolutely nothing. And I thought, is this the way it is for people in the comic book industry? Is this what it's really like? Is this what I have spent my whole life since I was 5 years old looking forward to? This is awful. And I got a call from Dave Sim after about 2 weeks of laying on the couch and crying. And he said, what's wrong? I said, I don't know. I said, I don't know what's wrong. I feel awful. And he goes, it's post-convention blues. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he goes, it's reality hitting, because the real life of a cartoonist is solitary. It's hard work. It's hard work for not necessarily a lot of money. And you spend all summer going to conventions, having people kiss your ass and treat you like a star. they're always asking for donations for this charity or that charity because they think you've got bottomless pockets. If you refuse for whatever reason, you're stingy, even though you don't have the money to go buy a sandwich sometimes. And then you come home and you have to face that reality. And this was my first summer convention season, and the reality of what it would, I thought, oh my God, have I just spent all this time and effort trying to get to this point? Oh gosh, is there a top to this bottom? Oh, it didn't look good. So once he clarified what had happened, once he crystallized it for me, I went, you're absolutely right. I was able to get up, and at that moment I made the decision whether or not I was going to go forward or just quit and get a real job. And I said, well, I think I'd like to give it another shot and see where it goes from here. And I did. I'll I'll not soon forget it, though. Any more questions? I don't know why this guy thought I was a prostitute. This is the only thing. This is the only time it's happened. It's happened before when I've gone to rock concerts or whatever, and they think you're a groupie, so they're always asking you for your hotel room key. But I was on my way to a party at one of the conventions, and hotel security stopped me in the hallway and wanted to see my key because they thought I was a prostitute, and I figured, you know what? You know, am I the only non-troglodyte in the room? Is that why you want to see my key? I don't know what that means. I didn't know whether it was a compliment or not.
I don't know. Some of those really classy call girls wear very expensive clothes.
Yeah, I thought, well, I'm wearing a suit. I couldn't figure it out, but yeah, it was Atlanta Fantasy Fair. It was the year after I got offered the opportunity to become one. Same hotel. Well, I was staying in a different hotel, but the convention was in the same hotel. It was the very next year, the Atlanta Fantasy Fair, and I'll never forget that because it was like, you know, year before they were offering me money, the next year they're thinking I look like one. I'm really moving up in the world.
Did your price go up?
No, I just showed him my key, and it took me a little while to figure out what the hell was going on, and it was like, hey, wait a minute, you know, it was pretty funny because, you know, I think I was only about 20 years old at the time. I don't really remember, maybe 20, 22, I don't know, doesn't matter, but that was kind of embarrassing. But nowadays, if something like that happens, because, you know, there are some restaurants in New York where they won't even let women dine alone. You know, I get really uppity and I pull out my Gold American Express and I tell them where they can put it. But, you know what I mean?
Victorian.
Yeah, it's very Victorian. And there was one time I was going to a Robert Plant concert, and I had paid for a balcony hotel room by the pool, and they wouldn't let me sit by the pool because they were thinking I was a groupie or something, and I chewed them out, and I said, well, I was a groupie, but I was paying to be in that hotel.
That's none of your business.
That's none of their business. I have the right to use the patio. I paid for it. Right. I'm going to sit by the pool. And I called the manager, and I really reamed him out, and I said, this room's bought and paid for, and I'm just going to sit anywhere I want. So, but that has nothing to do with comics.
But it's still a great story.
Yeah.
Well,
talk about the themes of your work.
Oh, God, the themes of my work.
These are things that are going to have coalesced when you were barely thinking about them. And some of them you're going to have outgrown and still felt obligated to make.
Boy, ain't that the truth.
Others are going to be things that appear over time.
Do I look like Carol Burnett every time I do this? I keep pulling my ear. I just realized what I'm doing. You know, I realize that there are some elements of A Distant Soil that are frozen at the same time I started doing it. And I find it really interesting that when I first started doing A Distant Soil, the lead character, Liana, was much older. And I just think it's interesting that when I first got into publishing, she's now become younger, and she is frozen at the age that I was when I got into publishing. And I realized that the whole book has become kind of a metaphor for people, for the child prodigy, where you've got a young girl who is completely out of her element that has something that everybody seems to want. And I've put a lot of that into my book, and now it's, you know, pretty weenie, you know, comic book industry kind of having something everybody seems to want. But at the time, I felt like true north. You know, it was every publisher saying, we want to work with you, and every dirty old man saying, I want you to come up to my room. And I got an inordinate amount of attention for no other reason than I was very young and very unique. I was the youngest woman in the business. There was nobody else around. And I got just as much admiration as I got resentment. And I've sure put a lot of that in the book. And, but I don't think that's changed much. But I've been able to bring a more adult perspective to it. Of course, I wasn't really aware of what was happening at the time. I think I was unconscious of just about everything I was doing. But I'm very aware of it now, and I can look back on some of the things that I'm doing in the story. For example, there are a couple of villains in the story, one in particular who you do not know, and I've been working on this book for 10 years, you didn't know for almost a decade that this woman really was a villain. And I based her on someone I had met in the comic book industry, somebody who was a master of deception, hanging back to always play good cop, bad cop with someone else. There was always somebody being pushed forward to play the bad cop, but she always seemed to be solicitous and helpful and blah, blah, blah. And she was actually the one who was pulling all the strings, doing all the manipulation. And I don't think I could have written such a character if I hadn't met such a person. I don't think I could have created such a character without that experience. So a lot of, I don't really consider A Distant Soil to be science fiction, even though that's what it's classified as. I consider it fantasy. But more than anything, I'm interested in the psychology of the characters.
That's exactly what I didn't want to hear. Somehow we had a great time last year, apparently, and we're going to try to do that again tonight. But I could screw it up. I could screw it up, but the beginning's the hardest part. Sorry about this, folks. I'm self-taught, just like my comics, so I might screw a few lines up. My perspective might be off. This thing is, who built this? Okay. My first job tonight is to introduce the person who'll be giving the keynote address. I didn't know this was going to be my first job for the night until about an hour and a half ago. So I wrote something here, but it looks like Mr. Mixia-Pitalik over and over and over again. So since his name is right here, I just figured I would just, I mean, I could say things like he's a force of nature in the comics world, he's controversial, things like Paul said about me, which made me embarrassed, or sounded like a comics buyer's guide article. I'm not knocking you, you had to say something, I understand that. I just figured I'd just say the names of some of his work. We all know who he is, we all know what he does, but I just thought it might be interesting to just hear this. Daredevil, Elektra, Ronin, The Dark Knight Returns, Martha Washington, Big Guy and Rusty the Robot, Hard Boiled, RoboCop. Whoa, RoboCop 2 is not supposed to be there. I gotta give the. I gotta give you $5 back, don't I? All right. Sin City, 300, and of course everyone knows he'll be doing his long-anticipated sequel to The Dark Knight. After that, he will be doing his series based on Jesus, which Dark Horse hopes does very, very well, since they're already hoping to put him in some sequels. Jesus versus Predator, Jesus Christ versus Aliens. I didn't remember the last one, so I'm going to read it off the joke page, sorry. Oh, Jesus Christ and the Justice League of America versus Predator, Aliens, and Terminator on the Planet of the Apes. So now we'll finally know who's stronger, Jesus Christ or Superman. Anyway, enough jocularity. I think that, all jokes aside, the man's work speaks for itself, and let's let the man speak for himself. Mr. Frank Miller.
thanks for the nice reception. It's kind of hard to be cranky in the face of it, but I'll manage. Mostly the reason I get cranky is when perfectly sensible people act in perfectly stupid ways. Like in comics and like right now. I'm talking about how the comics people relate to the rest of the world. It's really strange. It's really weird. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, just think of it like we're, we know we need a lot from the rest of the world, but think of it like we are just trying to be really good. We show up in our Sunday best at their doorstep. We're bringing flowers, we press the doorbell, and then we run like hell. We got issues. The kind you can't stuff into a Mylar snug. Is it a love-hate relationship, or is it a lust-fear relationship? I don't know. We're confused. We're sending more mixed signals than the Florida electorate. Just listen to us. Excuse me, rest of the world, please notice us. All right. Please notice us. Yeah, way over here, the guy with the bad haircut, that's me. Excuse me, rest of the world, please don't notice us. Just don't notice us. You might censor us. Please, please, please. I'll censor myself so thoroughly it'll make your head spin. I'll be very, very quiet. Excuse me, rest of world, please give me Hollywood money. Just a little bit of it. Just a little bit of what you got would mean so much to me. Excuse me, rest of world, once you've had your way with me, once you're done with that, you don't have to leave a note or anything. Please don't laugh at me. It's mixed signals and it's damn confusing. Still in all, we live here and we better figure out what the hell we're doing. The direct market is about as hale and hearty as a beached whale. And Marvel Comics has spent the last few years muttering to itself and pushing around a shopping cart. So us failing to look for new venues and new readers would be 8 kinds of stupid. We gotta shop around. 2 questions then. What do we want from whom? And what do we have to offer? First off then, the rest of the world. And it's really sad that so many of us call it the outside world. That term sounds, it's way too in vitro for my taste. And sadder, worse yet, is that we call it the real world. If it's real, then what are we, fake? So having established that we are not a laboratory experiment or an incredible simulation, let's postulate that the very large part of the world that is unconcerned with comic books is not an alien planet. We're a part of it. It's our world too. So what do we want from it? Let's just think clearly. What do we want from this world? More readers? Oh yes, absolutely. Money? Sure, you betcha. With the money, just make sure you read the fine print. Keep an eye out for 2 terms. Perpetual license and your firstborn. And don't drop the soap. What else? Respect, mass market acceptance. Well, with that it gets a little dicey, kind of like a gerbil being shoved into a Cuisinart, it gets a little dicey. After all, there's a reason they call it the mass market. It's massive, all right? It's fat, it's big, and it's dumb as a post. You see, it all gets down to mouths. Not brains, not hearts, not souls. Just mouths. It all gets down to food. This will make sense soon, I promise. People who call our culture a consumer culture are on the right track, but they don't go nearly far enough. Ours is a devouring culture. Our choices of words are revealing. Look at how even our own field, creative work, is called product. It's product. Look how artists, writers, brain surgeons, and pig farmers are all lumped together under the term provider. She saves your life on the operating table, she's a provider. He flips your burger, he's a provider. We can likewise lump together Walt Whitman, Michelangelo, and Rosie O'Donnell as content providers. Product. From Denny's to McDonald's to Texaco to Exxon, the mass market makes one preeminent demand of its product, and that demand is that it be consistent. You want to know what you're going to get. No challenges, no surprises. A cheeseburger in Boise must taste and look exactly like a cheeseburger in Seattle. Everything's got to be easy to swallow. Everything is got to be the same every time. No challenges, no surprises. And among all the homogeneous products ingested, equally safe, equally predictable, is entertainment. Mass media entertainment. Hollywood. Swimming pools, movie stars. And don't get me wrong, for all this madness and stupidity, more on that later, working in Hollywood can be a gas. It's a fun business, a glamorous business, a sexy business. Yet the operative word here is business. You must never forget that when you're dealing with these folks. It's business, it's always business. You'll meet lovely people, sweet people, even honest people, really. I've met two. The honest people are the ones telling you you're as disposable as used cat litter and just as valued. Enjoy the happy talk, but be aware that it's friendship when they want free work out of you. And it's just business when they turn around and fire your sorry butt. Expect this, expect to be fired. It is an axiom in Hollywood. You'll hear it from any veteran or screenwriter between bitter sips of whiskey at Musso and Frank's. You will be rewritten. It's not because anybody's being particularly malicious. No, not most of the time anyway. And it isn't necessarily because what you write sucks. It's the money, honey. Comic books cost, what, a few grand to publish? That isn't even a tip for the caterer in the movie biz. The stakes are so high they paralyze the mind with fear. They need so many butts in so many seats they can't afford to annoy, offend, or confuse anybody. Ever. This product has got to be safe, dependable, consistent. No challenges, no surprises. You want to know what you're going to get. It's a pleasant and ruthless business, Hollywood is. So when they come calling, and they will come calling, these days movie options are falling across our field like pieces of the Hindenburg. When Hollywood comes calling, stay smart. If you want to play the game, stay smart. And never forget that you hold the only cards that count in this game. Ideas. Stay smart and don't be snowed. These folks, they got all the money in the universe. And they got offices the size of football fields. And they got these gorgeous trophy wives. And they're so awfully busy, they're chatting into their cell phones and watching dailies when you're trying to talk to them. And they refer to really famous people by their first names. But they're running a little dry when it comes to ideas. No, that's not exactly right. They've got ideas. They got bags of ideas. There are very, very talented minds in Hollywood, and lots of them. There are people who work very hard and aspire to bring fine ideas to fruition. There's even a tiny handful who achieve something worthy and wonderful. But God, so much of it ends up as roadkill. It's the money, honey, the money and the fear. That close personal friend you've developed a close personal friendship with has another close personal friend who happens to be his boss, and will fire your close personal friend the instant your project doesn't move. A sure thing. A sure thing. Safe. Consistent. Predictable. Easy to swallow. So even though ideas are generated in Hollywood, they might as well be submitted to the Taliban Arts Council. And here we are. Here we are. Look at this. Just right for the pick. It just bursted with fresh ideas. And sure, most of our ideas are lousy. There's sure a lot of them, you know. We must look like a pinata to those folks. And they're certainly treating us like one. Swinging blind, just break the sucker open and see what falls out. And these ideas we've got in such abundance. It's not that we're smarter than Hollywood. Well, yeah, we're smarter than Hollywood. But it's not that. It's that in comics, we can take our ideas the distance without running up the national debt. Our ideas don't have to go through that abortion clinic they call the development process. We got what they want because they can't make it happen. We have to know this. We have to be aware of this. So if you're going to do business with Hollywood, never think of yourself as a second-class citizen. Stay smart, stand tall, and steel yourself. Get ready. Know that one of three things is going to happen. Thing number one, your creation will be translated into a work of utter genius, and you'll make millions and millions and millions of dollars, and Gwyneth Paltrow will call you 7 times a day, and Jennifer Lopez will drape herself all over you as you accept your Oscar for Best Picture. That's thing number one. Thing number two, you'll make some pretty good money, and your baby, your creation you spent all that time writing and drawing, will be remembered for all time as one really crappy movie. Thing number three. Three is where things kind of get really depressing. Thing number three is when your creation is consigned to the elephant's graveyard. The elephant's graveyard is what I call a certain set of shelves that just about every... The elephant's graveyard is what I call a certain set of shelves that just about every development executive seems to have. These are shelves piled high with dead screenplays. I know this sounds strange, I've seen a lot of them. Right in their office, right in your face, for all the world to see, dead screenplays. I don't know why they display these unproduced, unloved, God-forsaken scripts for movies that never got made, all stacked like cordwood, but they do. And it's weird. So stay smart. Get it in writing. Don't put your baby on the block unless you're ready to see her sold, and stand tall. If they're talking to you, they want what you've got. Nobody's doing anybody any favors out there. And keep this in mind. If you lie down with dogs, you get fleas. And if you lie down with tapeworms, you get tapeworms. Our field has gone a little nuts. It's gone a little nuts over Hollywood. I mean, that's the only reason why publishers kowtow to this rag. I mean, come on. Damn you. I don't care. Damn you. So, shall I start over? Anyway, like I said, that's the only reason why publishers kowtow to this Bible written by Satan, okay? Hollywood executives are notoriously poor readers. And they really are. Why do you think they hire people called readers? I mean, duh. Readers. Those are wannabe writers who provide coverage, and that's a term you gotta love, coverage. I mean, we're talking about, it's a script, not the damn Gulf War. You want coverage? These envious wannabe readers provide coverage for executives who don't read much. And get this, they're proud of not reading. One TV guy I met, full of a totally hyperactive disdain, he sniped at me. I don't read comic books. I read scripts. You're lost, pal. I don't read comic books. I read scripts. No, it's not true. They don't read comic books. They read Wizard magazine. Or at least the publishers think they do. Either way, the result is the same. For all the disgust you'll hear about Wizard and its shoddy practices when you talk about publishers and marketing, when you talk to publishers and marketing folks. For all the, and I've yet to hear a single good word from anybody about this thing that ought to come on a roll. If the paper weren't so damn insufferably slick. For all of that, the publishers kowtow. Even though this tree killer here regularly and continuously cheapens and poisons our field, aesthetically and ethically, they grovel. Even though this monthly vulgarity reinforces all the prejudice people hold about comics, declaring to all the world that we're as cheap and trashy and stupid as they think we are. We sponsor this assault. We sponsor it. We pay for the goddamn privilege. Thank you, sir. I'll have another. But really, when do we finally get around to flushing this thing? This load of crap. When are we going to flush it once and for all? And when are we going to finally realize what we've got? Just look at the candidates for these awards that are coming up. Free minds, free hands, producing works that no committee could come up with, no development executive could allow, no focus group could approve. Minds like Harvey Kurtzman's, alive now and working. Look at what we've got. What we have in our little field, and it's little, but it's smart and it's getting smarter. What we have is magic. Magic that certain people are eager to bottle. Deal with them then, if you wish. But don't look up at them. Look down. And be certain of this, our field will pull out of this slump, and it won't be Hollywood that'll rescue us. And it ain't gonna be the internet either. It'll be the books. It'll be the comic books. Ladies and gentlemen, the Harvey Awards. Thank you.